Hi, this is Pat McDonald, your host for Vote for Vermont, where our tagline is listening beyond the sound bites. Tonight we have a completely different format for you. Never done this before. I am turning the mic over to Deb Billado, who is the chair of the Vermont Republican Party. Tonight's format is a panel discussion with Deb as moderator. Deb will introduce the panel members and explain the format a little bit more as soon as I pass the baton. As you know, this show is open to all parties, candidates, and elected officials. Invitations to come on the show have been extended to both the Democratic and Progressive parties. We hope they will take us up on our invitation. So without further ado, here is Deb Billado.
Thank you, Pat, for that introduction, and welcome to the viewers. I am Deb Billado, and I want to thank Campaign for Vermont for presenting this forum today. We hope this is to be the first of a series of presentations, panel discussions that we'll be having across the state of Vermont. This is a panel discussion about Vermont and Vermont politics. Each panel member will have up to 2 minutes to answer the questions, and I will allow for 1 minute for follow-up questions and answers. We'd like to take a moment and introduce our panel members. We have Joe Benning, Anya, Tynio, and Bradford Broyles, and I'd like them each to introduce themselves and speak a moment about who they are.
So I'm Senator Joe Benning. I represent the Caledonia District in the Vermont State Senate. I also serve as the Senate's minority leader. I am the chair of Senate Institutions, and I also serve on Senate Judiciary Committee. I am a lawyer by trade. I have been in practice for almost 36 years now. I live in the town of Linden with my wife. We have 2 children, Emily and Justin. And my greatest hobby is riding a motorcycle around the country. Some say I play a pretty good guitar.
Anya.
Hello, I'm Anya Tynio. I am from West Charleston, Vermont, and in 2018 I ran against Peter Welsh for U.S. House of Representatives. I am in advertising as a trade. I grew up on a farm, and my greatest hobbies would probably be reading, horseback riding, and taking care of my animals when I'm not politicking around the state.
Hi, I'm Bradford Broyles. I live in Mendon, Vermont. I've been in Vermont for 13 years. I come from Southern California, where I was involved in the real estate business for quite some time. Since I've been in Vermont, I've been active in Vermont politics, specifically with the Rutland County GOP. I've run a couple statewide races for candidates, for Republican candidates over the years. In the last 4 years, I've been producing political comedy for Blaze Television for a couple shows that we produce out of Los Angeles, but they're all from Vermonters.
Fantastic. What a great panel we have today. Thank you for coming today for this.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you. So we do have a gong bell in the audience that you might hear if you're reaching the end of your time limit. And obviously we would let you finish the sentence, but not a book. How's that? Okay. So let's get started here. The first question is, what do you consider to be Vermont's biggest political challenge, and what plan would you offer to help lead towards a solution? Brad, why don't we start with you?
Well, thank you. Thank you for having this, and thank you to Campaign for Vermont for presenting it. Vermont has many huge challenges, as we all know, but a couple of them that I see that are kind of intertwined are the demographic situation that we have with stagnant demographics. Our population is getting older. We don't have enough young people like the ones in this audience that have good jobs, that are paying taxes. We need to draw those type of people. That directly ties, I think, to the kind of the anemic economic condition that the state is in. We need new blood, we need new people, new taxpayers to come in and for the different opportunities that we need to grow here. So that would be the emphasis, and I think there could be some bold economic incentives to develop the resources for young people to have that they could use when they move here to Vermont, in short.
Thank you, Brad. We'll just move to your left, Anya.
I would say the biggest challenge that the state of Vermont faces politically and in everything else is socialism. I think that the socialist climate of the state is prohibitive to growth, to economic freedoms, to having businesses thrive, and ultimately to our population problem. People are leaving the state searching for better opportunities. So I would say socialism in the core is what is wrong with the state of Vermont right now.
Okay.
I'm going to go with Brad's demographic situation. The state of Vermont just recently released statistics indicating that for the first time in our history, those people who are 65 and older greatly outnumber those who are 18 and below. That is really problematic. As people like me, I'm age 62, going to be 63 in the not too distant future, get to a point where we want to retire, the impact on the younger people is going to be absolutely terrible. The services that we currently provide have to be supported by people who are working and providing good jobs to enable that to happen. And unfortunately, we're seeing fewer and fewer of those in the state. And as those demographics change, the pressure on the state will be enormous to meet its basic responsibilities like infrastructure, keeping the environment clean, responding to people who are in need. Those things are absolutely top priority for me, and at this point in time, this demographic situation, I think, is the biggest problem we're facing.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Do we have any questions amongst each other for other panelists on your responses?
No, I would say as a young person, I do understand what they're saying about demographics, and I agree that we need to have younger people in the workforce to sustain the state, but I still feel that the main problem is socialism.
Is socialism?
Yes.
Okay. What about the job market in Vermont? Do you think the job market is working well for us? That there's enough jobs being offered that would keep young people here?
If you're looking to me to start, there's two problems with the job market. One is we actually have jobs offered all around the state right now that we can't fill because there's an absence of workers. The jobs that we do have, to a large extent, are not paying enough for people to survive. Having that change is going to require a drastic influx of businesses that are able to have better paying jobs and more workers who are here to actually take advantage of them. So right now I would say we are not in a good state. We need to change those two factors.
I did read recently that the top 6 jobs in Vermont are actually very low-wage jobs. They're service industry. They're retail, they're McDonald's, they're gardening jobs. Those are not necessarily jobs that people out of college are pining for and looking for. Do you see any programs or any opportunities for the state to encourage businesses to come to Vermont and open doors here in Vermont? Because I get the feeling that our doors are closed and that a lot of industry doesn't want to come here because of the tax burden and the economic burden in the state.
Well, according to a 2018 article in Forbes magazine where they were talking about business in the state of Vermont, the state of Vermont's cost of doing business for the companies is 12% higher than the national average. So that alone is prohibitive to many companies to come. I agree that there are jobs that are not being filled, and the drug abuse problems of the state also contribute to that. There's a lot of times where jobs are being offered, but there is a drug test in place, and they are unable to take the test, or they're unable to pass the test if they do take it. So those are contributing factors as well. All in all, I would say that the job market in the state is not good and definitely needs worked on.
I see it as kind of two Vermonts. You've got Chittenden County, which has strong growth. You go through Burlington around here, and there's activity, there's construction, there's businesses opening, and then you get out to the rest of the state, from Washington County to Rutland County, down south, and it's a different world, and the jobs are struggling. The jobs have left. I'm from Rutland County, so I can speak specifically to Rutland. I've been here for 13 years, and I've seen a lot of big companies leave, and I've only seen a few come and set up shop. But there's progress being made, but it's a challenge when you get outside of Chittenden County.
Yep. Thank you, Brad. Yes, as someone that lives in Chittenden County, I've noted over the past 10 years tremendous amount of housing going up in Chittenden County, and I'm seeing it in other counties too, Franklin County, Lamoille County, other counties too, but not at the level that I'm seeing in Chittenden County. The thing I am noting is it's very dense housing. They are apartment buildings, 1 and 2 bedroom apartments, and very expensive, very expensive. So thank you for pointing that out.
Can I follow up on?
Yes.
Brad does have a point. Chittenden County is really doing quite well, actually, despite the housing problems that they may have. But as a resident of Caledonia County, I'm backed up against New Hampshire. I spend a great deal of time arguing on the Senate floor when issues are being presented and programs are being put in place. I try to point out constantly that, in fact, our ability to compete with the state of New Hampshire is virtually impossible under these circumstances. I've been to Rutland many times. I've noticed the difference between Rutland's business population and St. Johnsbury's business population. If you go through downtown St. Johnsbury right now, you will see numerous empty storefronts. That is somewhat of a problem in Rutland, but I would suggest that if you're literally backed up against New Hampshire, it's a completely different world. Even though Rutland is different than Chittenden County, we along the Connecticut River Valley are suffering as a result of what's going on in New Hampshire. And that's a constant refrain inside the State House. How to cure it? Maybe we'll get to that a little later.
I would like to add also that being from the Northeast Kingdom and right up near the Canadian border, opportunity is virtually non-existent in those certain ways. Granted, we have improved the storefront problem just a little bit, that there are more businesses there, but unfortunately, they come and go so often that they're not sustainable.
Good. All right, are we ready to move on? Next question is, for several years, Vermonters have elected a Democrat majority in the House and in the Senate. Can you comment on how this impacts Vermonters and why you believe there is such a strong Democrat majority? Brad, we'll start with you.
Well, I've been here for 13 years, as you know, and I've only seen majorities of Democrats in the House and Senate since I've lived here, so I don't know anything else. But I do know the history of Vermont, that it was the reddest of states back in the day, going back to maybe the 70s and before, and now we're arguably one of the bluest of states. So what's happened? Why has it happened? And I think it's a function of a lot of things. It goes to demographics. I think a lot of left-leaning people have moved here throughout New England, have set up shop in Vermont. The Democrats have outworked and outraised money and taken advantage of finding their next stars from school boards and working their way up through the system. And we're at a point where Republicans don't have a voice at the state level, and we do, but I mean not at the federal level with what we have in Washington. We're missing that voice, and so it's kind of festered to the Democrats have the momentum, they have the money, the resources, and it's you get what you get with it, which is one-party rule that Joe can speak about, and it's not healthy for Vermonters, whether it be all Republicans or all Democrats. It's always best when you have a blend and there's some compromise. But these days, we're just the disadvantage to Vermonters is that there's no obstacle you can put, there's no road bump you can put up to slow things down, bad legislation down, and it's we're on the fast track for a lot of it these days.
Good. Anya.
Well, I would think that, unfortunately, it comes down to the fact that the Democrats are better at reaching the youth in the state. They go to the colleges, they use the college vote to their advantage. Even though these students may not be long-term residents of the state of Vermont, they're allowed to vote in Vermont elections. People on the federal level will go to them and promise free education, free, and they will in turn vote for them. And it's truly unfair to the residents of the state of Vermont because these children have no vested interest. They're not going to stay, they're not going to have to live with the consequences of these votes. That is one of the reasons. The other reason is that throughout the years, as he was saying, there's been an influx of people that have come to the state of Vermont with liberal views, have set up housekeeping, and have created this world that they want it to be of the socialist dream, so to speak. And again, it's unfortunate for the true Vermonters who are struggling every day because of it.
I guess I'm going to part ways with my colleagues here a little bit and say that the Democrats have taken a platform of their own and have done a much better job than we have in selling that platform to the Vermont demographic. This is not a situation where there's a group of young people, for instance, who are here temporarily and are going to vote and then move on with their lives. The Republican Party, when it was founded in 1859, had ideals. It presented issues that the public in general appreciated and wanted to hear. And as a result, since 1859, up until literally the 1960s, it was locked in for power purposes in the state. Since the 1960s, issues have arisen, and I think the Republican Party has slowly forgotten how to reach the Vermont demographic. And that's why we are struggling to reach young people like these folks who are in our audience right now. Most of these folks here were probably born here. Many of them probably will go away for a while but want to come back at some point in time. All of us have a desire to experience life outside of our local communities at some point in time. But when they come back, they want to know that there's good jobs available. They want to know that there's a party in power that is going to take priority on preserving things like our environment, trying to make sure people who are in need are taken care of, and give people who are generally concerned about their own communities a reason to want to vote for a Republican. I have struggled with this in my own community. I am the last standing state senator east of the Green Mountain Range and the only one in the Northeast Kingdom. It wasn't 15, 20 years ago that was completely the opposite. And as I've viewed the demographics over the past 40 years, clearly the Republicans have been failing to reach that group of people that are voting here as a normal demographic. Thanks for the first gong.
If I may, so you don't feel that the Republican Party has the moral ground that people are looking for? Is that what you're trying to say?
No, I absolutely did not say that, and I've been accused of that on several occasions. But the bottom line
how it comes
is,
across, I suppose.
well, I suppose it is how you choose to interpret my words. Morals are not part of the equation whatsoever. There are people in the Progressive Party, the Democrat Party, and the Republican Party who all have questionable morals. The issue is, how does our party sell to the young people in this audience? How do we maintain the Vermont demographic? Before I get gonged again, I just want to say that's our responsibility, not their responsibility. We need to deliver a message that they can appreciate, and we have been failing at that.
No, I agree with what Joe just said, and what I see on social media, and I would imagine that people in this audience and watching on TV, you're on Instagram, you're on Facebook, you're on Twitter, et cetera. Conservatives or Republicans are, by my estimation, outnumbered probably 10 to 1 on the social media platforms. And that's part of the messaging. We're not effectively reaching our consumers, our customers, our prospects with our message because we're not on the platforms where people are getting their information from. And it's a problem. We need to find a better way to do it.
So Brad, do you think that's a demographics problem? That the party is aging
Well,
and maybe
definitely.
not as social media oriented
Well,
as perhaps the left might be? And the reason I say that is, Anya, you mentioned something interesting, is that, please correct me if you think I'm wrong, I think the educational system is a powerful tool for whoever is in charge of it. And that is the future. That is everything. And if the youth coming through the school systems is taught by those in that party that might be in charge of that system, that's a very powerful tool that happens. Do you think that the Republican Party has lost its messaging ability because the party is just an older party and that we're not somehow reaching into the youth of the state? This could be a national problem too, but let's just stay with Vermont.
If I may, nationally, there are quite a few young Republicans. In the state of Vermont, it tends to be an older demographic, like many things are. It's not specific to the Republican Party. But I do think what you were saying about the schools, that who has their message being spread in the school system obviously has a leg up come election time, and that the Republican Party needs to make more of a concerted effort to reach the colleges, and frankly, as far down as high school and middle school. We need to start sharing fiscal responsibility, talking about taxes, talking about how this is going to affect their lives, talking about the implications of big government. All of these things we need to reach the youth with, and unfortunately, there's not really an avenue that we're following that does that effectively in the state of Vermont right now.
You're right, the headwinds that Republicans and conservatives have is, like you said, you've got, I mean, it's not a secret that most of the press bias is left-friendly, left-centered, especially here in Vermont. At the school level, at the education level, from grade school to high school and beyond, the colleges, it is definitely, I've just put 2 kids through high school off to college now, so I can speak firsthand to what I've witnessed, and your kids can get a great education like hopefully all of you have received here. But make no mistake about it, it's definitely a platform for the agenda of the left, on broad strokes I'm talking about. After the last election, there was literally like a funeral at Rutland High School. But so it's a challenge. It's one of those headwinds that, getting back to, there are young, articulate conservatives that are part of Turning Point USA, other young conservative groups. But here in Vermont, it's a very small pool of people. I'm thankful that people like Anya and other women and young people are taking an interest. We've got people like Corey Parent, one of your colleagues. So I love seeing young people getting engaged, but we need to be the party that convinces a lot more of them to join our side, and we can do better.
Thank you, Brett.
I'm not sure I have much conflict with what I've just heard. I will say that it comes back to us and the message that we deliver. If you read some of our own Facebook memes, we have people in our party that are talking online about the fact that nobody in the public school system says the Pledge of Allegiance anymore. I don't believe that's true. My wife teaches in a public school. She's not a member of the union. She's been teaching there for 35 years. That entire school says the Pledge of Allegiance. There's 700 kids there. So if we come out looking like we are ignorant of what these folks are going through, we're not going to appeal to them. I would love to be able to ask this audience, do you feel you were somehow brainwashed growing up? Or do you feel you have the ability to look at us and evaluate us as candidates, no matter what party we're running from? Because if you feel like you grew up being brainwashed, then I'll sit back and shut up.
Okay, great question of the audience. We'll save that for the end. At the end of the panel discussion, we'll hopefully engage the audience. One of the things that, before we move on here, that I've noted is I've done a lot of public service in my community, and bench building is one of the most important activities that we should be involved in. And I do believe that the Republican Party, let me just say that the Democratic Party has done a much better job of bench building than the Republican Party has. We need to be on our school boards. We need to be more involved at the local level, which creates exposure, which builds you as a candidate. People become confident in who and what you are and when you speak and so forth. So hopefully we'll see a little more activity in terms of bench building moving forward into the next few years. Any other comments before we move on?
Just to build that bench, you need to be reaching people at this age level.
Yep.
And some of us who have served likewise on the school boards or in select board positions, we're getting really old in our party. Mm-hmm. And somehow or other we've got to rebuild that bench. Right. From folks like these.
Yep. The thing I note, though, is people don't generally find interest in local politics until perhaps in their early 30s. If you don't have a job here for those people to keep them here until then, there's no bench building that will happen. Does that make sense to anyone? Everyone? Okay.
If I may, I
Yes.
think that bench building also comes down to being known in your community as being a person of character, somebody that they know throughout the time that you have said the same things. You stood behind it. You've tried your best in your community and your state at all times. And I think that helps people to feel connected to a candidate and to understand that they do mean what they say and they do have the best interest of the people at heart. And I think that's very important when we're looking at building candidates to run in the elections.
I would agree with that, Anya. Okay. Question number 3. Vermont's population has grown by just 0.1% since 2010, with a net increase, dare I say, of 555 people. Why do you think this is so? Anya, we'll start with you.
I would say it comes down to the economic climate that we have. Again, taxes and regulations, all of these things combine to make people feel that the state is unfriendly towards them, that they need to seek opportunity elsewhere. If you're a young person, and I am a young person, so I understand this fully, you want to go where you know you're going to do the best you can and not be limited. And unfortunately, in the state, there is a lot of limiting of what you can do. You can go into agriculture, which is a failing industry currently. It will always be there because we need it, but it's not something that people feel is helping them at this point. You can go into logging. You can go into a service profession. But there's nothing there that says, I'm going to go into this industry and 20 years from now, I will have what I want out of life. There's nothing that's being offered in that line. They're going to New Hampshire, as he was saying. It has much more opportunity. They're going to New York, they're going to Florida, they're even going as far as Arizona and California or the Midwest. All of these places are beating the state in opportunity. And it's unfortunate we have one of the most beautiful states in the nations, and people don't want to leave. They want to raise their families here. They want to be around their families. They want to have their friends nearby, people that they grew up with, and yet they're finding they can't. And that's the population growth. And even though there's not a lack of pregnancy in the state, I'm sure most people can agree with that, there is a lack of being able to stay here and make ends meet and make a living and make a prosperous life for yourself. So even though we do have children being born, we have so many people leaving. And it's not limited to young people. I know retirees that leave daily because the pensions are being taxed or because the cost of living is just too high. So when you add up all the people leaving, no matter what we're doing, we're not bringing them back in. She's really loving that gong, I can tell.
Yeah, I don't think the problem is totally unique to Vermont. There's other rural communities in states that are losing population. About a third of them, from what I've read, are in a similar predicament as we are with the anemic growth or flat growth. It's only about a third that seem to be doing well. So what is that third doing well that we're not doing? And we have some challenges in that we're in New England. We're not in, sunny. I mean, we got some weather challenges that are off-putting maybe for some people. But I think if we could focus on what makes us attractive as a state, getting back to some of the incentives for young people to have children and be taxpayers and raise their children here, we need to focus on that so that we get out of this stagnant slide that we've been in. And as the governor talks about and everybody knows about it, but we're at the point now where we have to do something about it. We have to.
Thank you, Brad.
The core to your question is the birth rate. We are not by any stretch alone in the birth rate problem. Most of the Northeast is suffering in the same way. The states that are doing the reverse tend to be those states that have major economic opportunities. The Balkan oil fields in the Midwest, California, which has so many technological opportunities, Washington, Oregon. I travel quite a bit. I listen to people as I go on the road. And there are many states that are suffering the same kind of downturn in their birth rates. You can see it across the nation in small towns that are literally evaporating before your eyes. Vermont has some very good opportunities. We are within striking distance of Boston, New York, Sherbrooke in Canada, Montreal. We have to be able to sell ourselves in a better way that we attract those people who are of parentage age, and that will turn the birth rate around. But I think it is incumbent upon us as a government to sell ourselves out of state in such a way that people do want to come here. They coming here means that people who are here are going to have better opportunities than they do now.
Them coming here, though, is contingent on them having the jobs and opportunities to support their growing families. So it does come back to economy as well.
We need to do something better than offering $10,000 to bribe people to move here, because it's a gimmick, and it gets a lot of press, and it's a success at that level, but we need the underlying fundamentals to be attractive to get here besides one check. So.
I think there's other states that are doing that as well. I never think that Vermont is building a better mousetrap. I think we often look at something that's going on somewhere else and think that we can do it better. Maybe we can, maybe we can't. I think Kansas is running the same program with limited success in terms of attracting people there.
If you have to pay people to live in your state, you're not offering enough to have them there. I mean, it's unfortunate. If you are paying people to live there, something is seriously wrong. So, yes, we can offer those programs, but we have to solve the core issues, or ultimately it's not sustainable to continue to do that.
One of the groups of our demographics that I'm very concerned about is the population that opted not to go to college. They're obviously going to fall into the lower economic level of our economic groups. And one of the things that I'm hearing from that particular group of people is there's nothing to do in Vermont. Boredom is trouble. Boredom leads to problems. And they're on the lower wage scale, you know, the group that we're trying to get $15 an hour for. And I'm just wondering, what are we doing are we doing anything to help that particular demographic in the state so that they're not so bored because they say there's nothing to do here, that they're turning to opioids and other issues that we have in the state? Joe, I'll start with you on that.
Sure. I have 2 children. Emily is the oldest. We put her through Cornell. Justin, the youngest, we dragged him kicking and screaming through high school and several different colleges that he wanted. It is now 15 years since he was attempting higher education. Guess who's making the most money between the 2 of them? He is. He managed to get a job that he liked, that pays extremely well and has great benefits by learning a trade. That is a key to a lot of kids who don't want to go through the normal college atmosphere. And I'm not knocking college by any stretch. Having gone through college and law school myself, I know the economic advantages to that. But the bottom line is Vermont is in a unique position with qualified jobs for people who want to go to trade school, who want to take advantage of apprenticeships. We are a very small state, so most of our communities, my own for instance, Linden, we have 5,000 people in our town. He worked his way up, my son, because he knew the people that were there, they knew him, and he got opportunities as a result of that. So how does the state take advantage of that and promote that for those young people that you're talking about that may not pursue a college path? I think we have a great opportunity in front of us, but again, we need to sell that.
Do we have anything to sell?
Absolutely. We have some of the highest tech industries in the world in Vermont. My son is now working for one of them. He's building impellers for aerospace. We have opportunities in Virgins. We have opportunities in Rutland and even St. Johnsbury with Weidman Industries. Those opportunities exist, and many of them have signs outside right now saying, we're hiring.
We will train.
And we can't find the people to do that.
The trade school in Rutland, Stafford Technical, is at capacity. So that's a great sign, and they're looking at hopefully expanding and being able to accommodate just the demographic that we're talking about here. Learn a trade. You can have a great life as an electrician, whatever. I mean, there's opportunity out there.
Vermont Tech is a classic example of that, which the state needs to support better in order to get those jobs promoted.
Great.
I think that when you're talking about college, there are kids that, like you said, don't really want to go that route, and trade schools are excellent. And what I hear most from people that opted not to go to college is that the cost of the education was not going to be something that the state was ever going to be able to repay them if they wanted to stay here. They would have had to have left the state. They would have had to have found jobs elsewhere. And in these cases, they did not want to do that. So they opted not to. They found jobs. They trained in them. They rose in the ranks, starting at the bottom and going up. And some of them have made managers and are now running these businesses just because they learned it over the years doing it. But I think that when you're talking about college education, you have to carefully look at the jobs available and decide whether that is going to be beneficial or not. And I'm all for hire, and don't get me wrong, but you do have to say there's only going to be so many rocket scientists. You need to look at the jobs available and decide how that works for you.
Good. Excellent. Thank you very much. Back to leadership. Here's a good one. If you were governor of Vermont and could highlight 3 issues you would make your top priorities, 3 issues that you would make your top priorities, what would they be and how would you lead on them? That's a big question, I know it is. But we'll start with you, Brad.
All right, I would make connectivity first and foremost, and it goes back to drawing the demographic that we want. We want young couples with children. I live in Rutland County. Again, you get outside of Chittenden County, and cell phone calls, things that you take for granted up here, fast Wi-Fi, cell phones, being connected. In today's world, it is such a challenge outside of Chittenden County, around this state, and it's problematic to the point where companies won't move here. It's one of those fundamental basics that we have to have. So I would have, and I know people have been talking about this, Joe's probably heard this for 20 years, but we need to redouble our efforts. There's good things going on. Company EC Fiber is going into areas that have 0 cell service, like Barnard, Vermont, outside of Woodstock, and getting cell service and broadband there. So that would be a priority. I'd put a cap on property taxes. California, 1978, passed something called Proposition 13, where it caps your property taxes, so it's a known commodity at, say, 1.1% of whatever the assessed value. It's passed so long ago, and it's still in place today because it's so popular. And property taxes are something that Vermonters have been screaming about for ages here, because they just go up and up and up and up, and it's unsustainable. And I think just from a public relations standpoint, cap property taxes and deal with the aftermath, but just enough is enough, because people are at their breaking point. So I would put a Proposition style 13, put that on your, can you get that on the calendar, Joe, maybe? And the other idea I have is like a new market tax credit. Like the federal government has tax credits for investors and developers to go into distressed areas and invest in the community and resources that the community needs. I'd like to see a Vermont new market tax credit that would raise money to support infrastructure like daycare and cell service and things that young families are going to need when they move here.
Joe? Or we'll go to Joe.
Infrastructure. 3 components: internet, cell service, transportation. You've got to have infrastructure in this state that will support the very basics of what anybody needs that's interested in coming here to support a business. You have an issue about rising property taxes, which has been a perennial issue. One of the things the legislature tried to do to deal with that was Act 46. We are now trying to assess, did that work, did it not work, but it's an ongoing process. Whether you agree with it or you disagree, that was one of the attempts made to try to correct the problem. We don't have the ability to put Proposition 13 on our populace because California's constitution is designed differently than ours. California, you guys had the ability to ask the legislature through a referendum.
Yeah.
We don't have that in our constitution, so we can't have that done. The only thing I can do about that in the legislature is to do what I've done. I've voted against the budget and I've voted against the fee bill every single year I've been there except one. And the one time that I didn't do that was I knew that what we were passing at that time was sustainable based on the revenues that we had. But that's only happened one time, and I've been there since 2011. The nutshell is, if you are not paying attention to that as a governor, infrastructure, critical component to having us survive as a state, education. these folks need to have the best education there is to enable them to compete in a global marketplace. If they don't have that, we are failing not just ourselves, but them as well. So I would be concentrating on those issues, but I'll end by asking a question. Who the heck would want the job?
Of governor?
Yes.
I could think of a few people.
Rebecca
More
Holcomb.
power to them. More
Think of
power
a
to
few
them.
people. Just a quick follow-up to yours. So if Proposition 5,
You're talking about a constitutional amendment.
Yes.
Yeah. Different than a referendum, which
no,
Bradford was
I'm
talking about.
going somewhere with this.
Yeah.
Is it Proposition 5 that we're looking to open the Constitution in, or is that 3?
Well, there were, I think, 6 proposals for constitutional changes, 2 of which actually got through the legislature to some extent. Prop 5 is the one that made it all the way through, and that is now pending.
So with that on the horizon, 2 years from now, it's a 2 or 4 year cycle
Yep.
to get that through. Is there any particular reason that no one has surfaced why aren't we proposing a referendum in the state of Vermont so that the people of Vermont can have a voice and put something on referendum should they so desire? I've always felt like, and did we ever have a referendum at any point? I've always felt like not having a state referendum really silences the voice of many if there's an overarching issue going on in the state.
To answer your question, nobody has attempted to bring such a bill in my lifetime in the legislature. I believe there have been previous attempts in the 70s and early 80s to try to do that, especially around the time that California was talking about it. People in Vermont were asking, why don't we have that ability? And I can't answer the question as to why nobody's ever bothered, except that I know in this day and age, with the current makeup of the State House, never happened. If I was to bring such a bill right now, it wouldn't get out of committee, much less through one of the bodies.
Thank you. Anya?
I think that one of the main focuses should be the opioid crisis. I think that with the opioid crisis, what it is, and the inability of employers to find workers who are going to be able to pass the drug test and to show up to work reliably and all of those things, that is something that hampers the state in more ways than one. We're talking about the burden on the families of the addicted. We're talking about the burden on children and family services, on the welfare system, on the job market in general, not to mention restorative justice, the courts, the law enforcement community that struggles with this every day. There needs to be tougher penalties for bringing drugs to the state. Currently, I believe that we have way too lax of penalties for this. We do want to encourage people to seek treatment. We don't want to punish people for seeking treatment, but there needs to be accountability for constantly being on drugs, for bringing drugs into the state, for getting people addicted to them. If you're dealing, that needs to be a whole separate issue from addiction. That needs to be treated in a way harsher manner than we are currently doing. Also, one of the other things that we need to focus on, of course, is jobs. Everybody says the same thing. I'm going to focus on the economy, I'm going to focus on jobs, I'm going to focus on education. And the reason they say that is because all of those things are always important. We do need to have quality education. Unfortunately, I think that in the school systems today, we are not seeing the quality education that we need, and that the students are suffering for it. The reasons behind that I'll go into my opinions on later. Jobs, education, opioid crisis, and obviously protecting the constitutional amendments that are intrinsic to the way our country was built. We must continue to do that, okay? I can go on and on.
Any questions for each other? Any
Just
questions?
so you know, the most recent statistics are now out on Vermont's opioid problem. Between January and May of this year, we had 39 deaths in this state from opioid overdose. The 2 worst counties, unfortunately, are Rutland and Windham counties. That's the bad news. The good news is we have actually peaked to some extent on the crisis. those numbers are lower than previous years. I don't want to be too overly optimistic, but there is a sign that what we have been doing to attack the opioid crisis, including attacking those who would bring drugs into this state, are actually beginning to show some signs of working. So I'll agree with Anya that we need to maintain our pressure on that. I just want to offer some hope that there is hopefully some light at the end of the tunnel.
Okay, so we're going to go to our last question and then turn our attention to the audience for potential questions or comments on what they've heard. If you had a magic wand, what would you do to help Vermont? Anya, I'll start with you.
When I first heard that question, I thought about it and I was thinking Second Amendment, all of these different things that are important to me. But if I had a magic wand, I would use it to put in place protections for the unborn. Unfortunately, in the state of Vermont, we have gone in a very, as I feel, ungodly direction with this. And if that was the one thing I could do, I would protect the unborn child. They have no voice, and if we don't speak for them, nobody will. And you also need to take into account the other 50% of the DNA, the father's voice, which unfortunately is not being heard either right now. It's unfortunate.
Okay, thank you, Anya. Joe?
I think that I would concentrate on making sure every Vermonter going through school had a real, sincere understanding of the history of this state, what we were formed for, what our intentions were, why we want to preserve things like a constitution, what is important about how to live as a society. If I had a magic wand, I would not just bring kids to the State House in 4th grade. They'd be there in every grade to ask different questions at different times, just to get to know the civic process, to teach all of the kids growing up today that we can have disagreements with each other, but it is critical that we not put each other down. In order to survive as a society, we can't be polarized. We have to be able to talk to each other. And I may be very opinionated in the things that I talk about, but I've never hesitated to step back and say, listen, Benning, listen to what other people are saying, because possibly the remarks that you're making should be changed to some extent. If your viewpoint should be changed for the betterment of all. Those are the things I'd like to see in a magic wand.
Thank you, Joe. Bradford?
Well, I like the magic wands from both of these two. I agree with both their perspectives. And if I had a magic wand, I would love to see Vermonters get behind an economic proposal that would benefit the Vermonters that live outside of Chittenden County. I mean, our mid-sized towns and cities throughout the state are struggling. I'd like to see this tax credit thing I talked about earlier. It's not sexy, but it's something that would have an impact and also attract the very people that we're trying to attract here and help the people that are here already. I'd like to see something bold that would go along those lines that helps people in Bennington and Springfield and Rutland, et cetera.
Great. Well, thank you very much for all of your answers and input today. So now we're going to turn our attention to the audience, which happens to be a very youthful audience today. And we have three people that would like to comment or ask a question. And if you step up to the microphone, would you just quickly introduce yourself and then ask your question?
Okay, so I'm Netznell Crisp. I'm 16 years old, and I live in Danby. And you all touched upon kind of the prosperity of Chittenden County in comparison to the rest of the state of Vermont. So my question is, how do you plan to protect, preserve, and sustain small Vermont towns without damaging their environments, social atmospheres, and unique historic elements? Thank you.
Big question.
Yeah. Well, I think you can maintain our integrity and take care of the environment, all those things that are important that make Vermont unique. I mean, we don't need billboards and high-rises to make Vermont successful. I think we can do exactly what you talk about, which is important about maintaining our roots and what we are, but at the same time, making things available to people that desire to live here so they can prosper here. That's the balance.
I would say through agriculture. Vermont has always been known as an agriculturally friendly state. Unfortunately, it's kind of drifting from that, but people want to come and they want to see the hills dotted with the farms, and it's good for the economy and it's good for the people and it preserves the land, and I think that is one of the biggest things that we could do in the state to preserve it.
First, I'd like to say I don't want to disparage Chittenden County. I disagree with the politics. I am envious, if you will, of the economy that's running there that my county is not enjoying. But how can we take those elements that are successful in Chittenden County and bring them to the other small towns around the state in order to have that economic driver? I think it's possible, but we have to do incentives in order for that to happen. Nobody wants to see, for instance, a small town school close. But the reality on the ground is if you don't have the student population to support it, you have a problem. So what can we do in order to change that? You have to have those economic drivers that are keeping Chittenden County alive, moving out. Can we provide tax incentives for businesses to move from Chittenden outward or to expand from Chittenden outward? Those are the kinds of things that government has to look at in order to entice those economic drivers while still preserving the essence of what small town Vermont is all about.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you for your question.
Hello, my name is Zach Handelman, and I recently graduated from the University of Vermont, and I currently live in Burlington. Something that you guys have talked about a lot during this discussion is competition with jobs from other states. And so I was wondering if maybe speaking directly to the young people in the state, especially those maybe more on the left, who believe in raising the minimum wage. And Senator Benning, you're right on the border, so you might have something to say to this, but maybe just speak to your position on why you should or shouldn't raise the minimum wage to $15.
Sure. I can start by saying we had a very large discussion in the State House this past year over that question. The people who are in Chittenden County are having a tough time trying to survive. There may be very good reasons why people in Chittenden County need to have an increase in the minimum wage. But if you come to my neck of the woods, I am literally up against New Hampshire that has a $7 and I think 25-cent minimum wage. If you are going to tell businesses in my area that they have to go up to $15 an hour, the ramification is the business leaves because it cannot compete on the border. If you go to Littleton, New Hampshire right now and you go to Walmart, count the number of Vermont cars. It's loaded in that parking lot with Vermont cars. There's no Walmart in St. Johnsbury. People are not shopping in St. Johnsbury, which is why you also have a number of closed storefronts. That's a problem. So we had this discussion about a minimum wage increase, and I brought an amendment. I suggested, let's try it in Chittenden County and see how it works. My amendment failed. I think it was 18 to 11. But it would have enabled Chittenden County to prove that something would work for Chittenden while still enabling some of the folks in my neck of the woods to maintain the businesses. I'll use this example of a coffee cup, and forgive me if I go a little longer. Let's say you're selling a cup of coffee on Church Street in Burlington, and you charge $2 for that cup of coffee. Simple, all right? You have foot traffic in Church Street in Burlington that could be anywhere from 300 to 500 people a day. Come over to Lindenville, where we're selling the same $2 cup of coffee, and you have foot traffic of maybe 35 people a day. How is a business owner going to compete with that if all of a sudden all of their overhead, all of their infrastructure has to be competing with a $15 an hour wage to the 3 employees that they may have in Lindenville? It's not something that's possible. So I constantly say, the people who are doing business in my neck of the woods will go to Littleton, New Hampshire. We don't want to have that happen. Let's try an experiment. See if it works in Burlington. Hopefully that'll drive things.
Do you feel your question was answered? Because if so, we could get a second question, and we're kind of running short.
Yeah. Thank you.
We could talk later.
Could you repeat the question you asked to all of us earlier?
There was a couple of them. One was, do you feel that you were brainwashed growing up in school?
Okay. So my name is Nessia Crisp, and I'm 18 years old, and I did not grow up in Vermont. I did elementary and middle school in Pennsylvania, but since coming to Vermont, I found that the liberal atmosphere just heightened in school, and I feel, not that I'm necessarily brainwashed, but in terms of my classmates and my teachers, I'm not able to have a voice in terms of my political views, and it's a lot of, this is kind of what's expected in society, and you can't really have any differing views on that, and I find that really hard in terms of talking to people openly about politics in the state and in the country.
If I may, when I was running for office, it was, I would say, almost impossible to get an audience in the colleges. They won't allow conservative speakers, and they don't say, oh, you're a conservative, you're not coming. They just make it impossible. So it is biased.
I'm actually trying to get in touch with colleges right now, and they're very not
I wish you the best of luck.
Yeah.
I do.
Thank you.
Can I ask what part of Pennsylvania you're from?
I'm right outside of Philadelphia. Lower Merion was the county I was in.
Okay. Was
I have
that
family in
generally a conservative area?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Yeah, politics weren't widely spoken about, especially Republican views.
So that shouldn't be happening to you or to anybody else. But let me take it out of politics for just a moment. I'm a Yankees fan. A lot of Vermonters are Red Sox fans. We battle with each other all the time over baseball. But what we shouldn't be doing is polarizing ourselves in such a way that we can't speak to each other. If you're being treated unfairly, I don't care whether you're liberal or conservative, that just shouldn't be happening. So if it is happening, please do let folks like me know, whoever represents you, we should be having a much more substantive conversation about it.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Nessie. Thank you, panel members, for this, for participating in this. As we said, this is the first in a series that we hope to be providing to the public, and
Thank you. I think it's very important to have these discussions.
yeah, thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Good.